And I'd like to welcome you to the third of the Scottish Island Futures 2050 and Beyond workshops. Um, this is a hybrid workshop, as you can see. So we have some physical people in the room next door at the Institute for Northern Studies, and we have others joining us from other parts of Scotland and other parts of the world as well. Speaking of which, there's Stacey from the Caribbean. So great to have you, Stacey. What we're going to do is we're going to run through the agenda today. So what I want to do is to have short introductory messages from you all, see who's here and where you come from, and then some of you have very kindly said that you'll talk for a short period to get our intellectual juices flowing, to get us thinking along the right way and thinking about the future. Some people will be coming in and others will be leaving because of course, the whole day is rather a long time to devote to something like this, but we'll be looking forward to others joining us over the course of the day. I've got Slido, which I hope will work, which will capture some of the ideas and thoughts that we have. But the hope is that it's going to be quite a relaxing, enjoyable, and simple day. As I've run two of these already. The first one I thought was went extremely well and looked at governance and the relationship between the Scottish Islands and the mainland, which is kind of fraught question at the moment, as you all know. But I thought it was a bit complex managing it. The second one, which looked at the state of the indigenous languages of Scotland and their future role in the islands, so Scottish Gaelic and Orkney dialect and Shetland, also went very well, but we simplified things a little bit and we left our recommendations to the discussion in the afternoon, and that's really what I want us to do today. So I want us to imagine different potential futures and then spend our afternoon enjoyably discussing it more and coming up with recommendations about how we might reach a successful outcome. Now today our focus, as you know, is about the economy, business, industrialization, and what sort of level of development is most suitable for the islands, because the islands seem to be well, the Northern Isles anyway, the focus of large-scale industrial development at the moment, which is wonderful in some ways, but not everybody's cup of tea. So it would be very interesting if we can come up with some ideas about what level of development is sort of suitable for the islands, in a way that helps us to have thriving communities, but also not lose that essence of island identity that we have. So there's a happy medium somewhere. So that's what we'd like us to try and discover today. I've got just a very short PowerPoint. I've said some of what I was going to say on the PowerPoint already, but I'll just run through one or two other things just to give you a flavour of what I'm hoping that we'll do, and just to give you a rationale for doing what we're doing. Some of you have already seen some of this before, so I've tried to change it a little bit. Others haven't. So there we go. So a quick speed through this, and then we can start with our short introductions and introductory talks from you out there. So hopefully you can see the share taking place. So first of all, this is a Royal Society of Edinburgh funded network grant that I got for this, and I thought it would be fun to try and imagine potential futures for the islands. And this is something that's been going on for a long time, and this is my favourite image of imagining the future in the 1930s. And they got some things correct. So they got the mobile phone. Of course, people have given up smoking primarily now, but there we go. This is what people imagined would be our future. And why not? it's quite exciting to try and dream a future that we might want to aim for. It's a useful thing to do. So as I said, there are a series of network meetings. The third. There will be a fourth one, which will be, it won't be on the 12th of May yet. I haven't finalised the date, but that will look at inter-island discourse and the creation of island-focused networks. And then there's going to be an online conference as well, which I hope everyone will come to and share their ideas. Again, it says June, but I think I'm going to delay that until after the summer to give everyone time to think about it. And we'll focus primarily on the recommendations that have been presented in previous workshops. So what we're doing today is we're looking into the future. So we're looking beyond the sort of planning horizon. We're looking, trying to get beyond that. In the previous workshops, sometimes it was difficult to do that. People have work in administration or work in industry that already has a plan for 2020 or 2030 or 2040, but we want to get back to that to sort of expand our horizon into what the zone of futures research, which is a big and interesting discipline and at the moment. Okay. And for those who've seen this already, hopefully you have been following up my link to Professor Jim Dator from the University of Hawaii, who came up with laws of the future. He's a very interesting person because he is an island-based scholar and a science and also something to do with living in Hawaii and having to think outside the box led him to getting involved and in fact devising the discipline of futures research. So we want to follow his guiding light today. So we want to look for prepared futures which we could envisage, invent and implement. So we want to do that, and don't be afraid to come up with wild and wacky ideas, because any useful idea about the future would appear to be ridiculous to the people at the time. You're not constrained by planning regulations at the moment. You can think sort of much more widely than that today, if you wish. So the reason for doing something like this is that no matter what the future is out there, it's going to happen. We're going to be affected by it, and it's useful to try and guide the flow of time, if you like, towards a preferred future rather than one that's just, maybe conventional in its outlook, or one that is a negative future, and which is classified here as a zone of growing desperation. So we want to be in the positive side of this graph and thinking towards higher islands. So thinking about the alternative futures gives mechanism to do so. Just to let you think about how far ahead is 2050? Well, it's the same in the future as 1996 is in the past. So it gives you some sort of idea of what level of change we might be anticipating in that period of time. Some things have changed a lot since 1996, others not so much, but also certain trends were already starting in 1996, which have gone on to affect us today, such as the development of AI with the defeat of Garry Kasparov for the first time by Deep Blue, the development of the first flip mobile phone by Motorola. In the Scottish context, the Stone of Destiny was brought back to Scotland, and Dolly the sheep was born, so the genetic engineering was beginning on its route, etc., etc. And for those who love fantasy, that was when the first Game of Thrones book was published as well. And who knew that that was going to grow into such a monstrous epic? So 2050. What's the future of the Scottish Islands going to be like? What's the role of the traditional industries in the islands? What will there still be crofting and farming and fishing? And what sort of technological developments will be awaiting us? So will we have sheep and robots? And those who are wondering about this image, this was created by Midjourney, so it's an AI-generated image looking to the future. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So welcome everyone to our exploration of the future of the Scottish Islands and their industries and economies. So how are we doing for time? Right, okay. Now, let's see. I've got a list of speakers here. As I said in an email to you, if I've missed you out of the list, apologies. Just put me right and I'll add you to the list. If for some reason you've decided, no, don't want to talk for 10 minutes, that's fine as well, because there'll be plenty of opportunity for sharing ideas in our discussion sections. So with that, I've got a list here. It's not in any particular order. It's just as people emailed me. But we have to leave a gap at 11 o'clock because Debbie Strang from Saxavord Spaceport will be speaking to us about what's happening on UNST at the moment, which is quite interesting given the explosion of Elon Musk's rocket yesterday. So she might have something to say on that as well. So, welcome everybody. When you speak, just also give us a little bit of information about who you are, and once we come to the end, if someone hasn't spoken, then also let me know, and you can introduce yourself as well. So let's start first then with Stacey. Hello, Stacey. It's nice to see you again.
Hey there. Oh, sorry, my cat's stealing the show in the background as usual. Hi, everybody. I'm Stacey Alvarez. I'm based in Barbados. I am the community manager and the academic council liaison for Island Innovation. And my background is in law and actually educational policy and legal consultancy and environmental activism. It's growing, and now having conferences like this. So I was thinking about industrialization from, obviously I'm based in a former colony, I like to say a large ocean state perspective. And for us, we tend to think about trying to balance what we refer to as the extractive nature of industrialization, where it's usually, it can tend to be a foreign entity that comes down and wants to build hotels or inject what they claim is prosperity into an economy. And all that does is create this huge gulf between people on the ground, more local people who don't really see the fruit of that industrialization. So we have to be very aware of connecting people at grassroots level with any benefits from development, which sounds obvious, but it does not happen as often as it should. And this can be seen in the kind of financing and the kind of finance vehicles that are available. For us, we need to, as a smaller island that imports like 90% of our food, we need to focus on food security. And a big issue with, industrialization is that it focuses on large supermarket and hotel chains that come into the island, but not the smaller farmers who need to learn how to present themselves as eligible for financing and grants. And often financial institutions just see it as too much of a risk. So we're looking to see how can we de-risk the idea of microfinancing for smaller farmers and smallholders, and see how can we boost our food security that way. So that's something we're looking at, the kind of the deindustrialization of the agricultural sector, which we think we can see it becoming more.
Oops, Stacey has just fallen off the grid there for a second. Hopefully she'll be able to come back and talk to us. But already some interesting things there. So de-risking microfinancing for island businesses and sort of deindustrializing the scale of agriculture in islands. So definitely some things to think about in our discussion. So I think we'll wait until no, we won't. We'll move on to the next one, next person, and if Stacey manages to come back, we'll reintroduce her and allow her to finish speaking.
Stacey,
Stacey, you're back.
Oh,
Excellent.
Okay, sorry, I got lost there. Sorry, it's the. So what was the last thing I was talking about? The
You were talking about deindustrializing the scale of
right
Ireland.
of agriculture. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're trying to combat here in the island and focus more on smallholder and farmers. And then kind of linked to that, we see the idea of research and development and capacity building when it comes to the renewable energy sector. Because renewable, energy costs are huge. We import, I think 80% of our energy costs is from fossil fuels. We import huge amounts. That is linked to the rising cost of food because fossil fuels are used to transport the food that comes here. So we're seeing how can we look at human resource capacity building in terms of if we invest in renewable energy technology or if renewable energy technology is brought into the island, how can we have a workforce, that can maintain that technology and innovate that technology in a way that suits us and balances the idea of industrialization. So that's something else. And then for us, we're seeing we do have that issue. We call it the young brain drain, where a lot of now young people, in as much as there's a renewed focus on, being proud of your island heritage. We recently became a republic, so that's a big thing. A lot of young people are still leaving the island. So how we're looking to see, how can we balance that by harnessing a more intergenerational knowledge transfer and providing a better level of mentorship to young people to see that the idea of this mass industrialization that sounds like it's so exciting and it's appealing, something is going to be lost along the way if all of us don't benefit from that. So we want to see how can we connect young people with the previous generations in a way that's good. And then balancing, obviously, what I call industrial levels of tourism, seeing how can we focus on regenerative tourism that again can be agritourism. It can link more to ecotourism and again link all the stakeholders together. So that's something we're seeing as really, really important to focus on more and more. So that's my view from a kind of a Caribbean small island perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Stacey. So while you were just off, we mentioned a couple of things. So you've certainly got some ideas that are very relevant to the Scottish Islands, and we'll definitely be picking up on in our discussion. So
Oh, thank you.
thank you very much. So next on my list is Alistair Brown from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Hello, Alistair.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine.
Great. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'll just give a brief outline of who I am and what I do and take it from there. So yeah, Alistair Brown. I work for Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I work within the innovation team within HIE. Just for anyone who's not aware, Highlands and Islands Enterprise is the regional development agency for the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And within HIE, as well as there being 8 sort of areas and area teams who work with businesses and communities and social enterprises. There's also sectoral teams focusing on areas like food and drink, energy, life sciences, technology, and there is a team who focus on innovation. So I work within the innovation team. I cover Orkney and Caithness and Sutherland. So predominantly what we are trying to do is encourage a culture of innovation and help support that, whether it's through awarding of grant funding, whether it's through training, networking events, whether it's through sort of trying to link up expertise that exists within academia or within research centres or within other rural areas and trying to share that knowledge and understanding. Especially from a rural context, I think when we think of some of the challenges and opportunities that rural areas have, I think innovation could and will have a big part, and historically has had a big part to play in how the areas adapt. So I've been in the role about 6 months. Previously to working with HIE, I worked for about 14 years at Orkney Islands Council. And within that area, I worked initially within the EU Leader programme for Orkney, which some of you will be familiar with, I'm sure. And then latterly, I worked within economic development. So predominantly working with local businesses, communities regarding sort of development opportunities, grant support, training, etc. And just to flip another hat on, in my volunteer role, I'm Vice Chair for the Stromness Community Development Trust, which is a development trust covering the town of Stromness and the parish around there. So if there's anybody else from High here, I'm very much in my official capacity, but I may flip between hats as the discussion goes on. Just a few key sort of thoughts. Obviously, from an Orkney context, Orkney's kind of bucking the trend. Our population is increasing while other areas seem to be decreasing. We have, when we produce, obviously a big factor on our energy future is the renewable energy and the work that and programs that's associated around that. We produce from our renewable energy sources around about 110, 120% of our energy needs in Orkney, yet we still have some of the highest fuel poverty rates. So there's obviously a clear disconnect and work around that. From an industrial perspective, areas such as agriculture and fisheries, particularly agriculture, still a very important industry within Orkney, but obviously with its own challenges that are being influenced through sort of international issues as well as local issues around about skills and around about succession planning and getting people from a younger generation into the workforce. And that, of course, is not unique to agriculture, but I would say a common theme throughout a lot of industries and areas within Orkney. I've predominantly obviously worked within the public sector, and within that sort of area, we generally our lives are ruled by policies and by strategies. And it's interesting, this webinar, this event is titled 2050 and Beyond. We focus predominantly on the government's National Strategy for Economic Transformation, which is by its own historic and current framework a 5-year programme, obviously very focused politically on the 5 years terms of government. If I was wishing to be in any way controversial, I might suggest that that is a very short-sighted way of looking at what is always going to be a long-term plan. However, we have to operate within that, and from a public sector perspective, it maybe provides its own challenges trying to look long-term. I'll probably stop speaking there and move on to someone else.
Well, thank you very much, Alistair. You've certainly got some really interesting insights to share today, and with your two hats on, that's particularly relevant and well, exciting. So I look forward to hearing more from you. And you put your finger exactly on the point of today, that we're looking ahead beyond the sort of the tyranny of the 5-year plan to see what we can think up. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, I'm just waiting to see who else we've got here. Okay. Next, we've got Marcus Craigie from Aberdeen. Marcus, hello.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to see you. It is not a pretty bit for me at times, so if it continues to do that and you can't hear me, just...
You're nice and loud, now you're very quiet. So your sound is coming and going. Are you still? You're not speaking at the moment, are you? Okay, he's going to try. Maybe yes, Marcus. If you go out and then come back in, sometimes that's the equivalent of giving a telly a kick. You know, sometimes it works. So we'll give Marcus a moment. And you can see that the Slido is now open. So if you can access that on your screen, just tell us where you are. So, I mean, you've already told us in some ways, those who are speaking, but this is quite handy for posterity that I can then print it off later on. So if you haven't answered the first question, where in the world are you? Now's the chance to do it. It's a bit more difficult for those in the room next door. That can't be done. But what you could do, you could have a little piece of paper there. Well, we know where you are, actually. Funnily enough, you're all in Orkney. So there's no problem there. But when it comes to the other questions, you might want to note things down on a piece of paper or something like that to share with us. There's Marcus.
Can you hear me okay there now?
That's better, Marcus.
Great. I've got a swap for the headset. Thank you very much for asking me just to speak about my project, Andrew. So I'm Marcus Craigie. I'm a PhD student, a first year student at the University of Aberdeen in the James Hutton Institute, and I'm funded through the Scottish Graduate School for Social Science. Andrew asked if I would briefly introduce the project, so I wanted to give you a pretty bit of context to hint at, as well as some of the research questions and methods that I'm looking to employ at the moment. At an international level, depopulation in many rural and island areas are seen as a policy problem, and at a Scottish Islands level, depopulation has been experienced at significantly different rates across some of our Scotland's islands. At a local authority level, across a longer term projection, population decline is likely. And between 2018 and 2043, it's projected that all of Scotland's islands at local authority level combined will lose around 49% of their population. In addition to this, the forecast is that the already imbalanced population structures are likely to be exacerbated in some islands. The issue hint this is many, obviously, but depopulation in those areas is an endemic problem in those peripheralised areas. It can cause cultural and language decline, and according to the Scottish Government, it can create sustainability challenges, weaken community resilience, and increase community vulnerability. In the late 2010s, with the Islands Scotland Act, which legislated for island proofing and for the development of the National Islands Plan, the depopulation challenge was gaining national attention. As part of the National Islands Plan in 2019, it set out to address population decline and ensure a healthy, balanced population profile. Since 2019, I think a lot has changed. We've gone through many crises, early to bring it in, but COVID obviously being one of those large ones, energy, cost of living, cost of everything crisis, and so on. And as such, I'll bring crisis into this project as a lens to look through the research questions. So to start off, I want to look at what, according to communities, according to authorities, community groups, according to governments, what is a healthy and balanced population profile? What point is population in the Scottish Isles seen as healthy, and what point is it seen as being balanced or unbalanced and unhealthy? How can permacrisis be conceptualised in islands? How does it feel in islands? How does it play out in islands? And how does that influence population change and dynamics? Thirdly, how can population change be managed and a healthy, balanced population, that definition hopefully found in earlier stages of the project, how can that be achieved with the use of policy instruments and interventions? And how can we share ideas across islands in Scotland? How can different approaches be adapted to different islands to help be crisis and island proofed? The methods are going to be operated over 3 different phases, and they're going to be iterative. They're going to be mixed methods employing surveys, focus groups, in-depth interviews, and image submissions. I'm looking to go to geographic case studies while still acknowledging that no Scottish island is alike, and the different experience, the lived experience on each is very different, and as such I'll be setting some key criteria in choosing which islands are under researched in this sort of field, are showing signs of population growth, are equally showing signs of population decline. Through working with communities and policymakers for the start of this project, it's hoped that it'll have a positive influence in policy design, help bring island proofing to the forefront of repopulation policy, and change the narrative of a one-size-fits-all approach to island repopulation and population change policy. The next steps, what I'm going to be doing at the moment, is defining those under-researched geographic case study areas, setting the criteria for choosing the locations to go and carry out this field work, and then pilot study questionnaires and interview questions. It's really important to be at networks like this and to create a conversation, and some folk in this meeting I've spoken to already, such as Adele. And if you have any questions or comments about the project, please do get in touch. I'm always happy to hear folks' views or stories about it, and I'll pop my email address in the chat, but realising that some folk are in person, it might be worth just saying it as well. It's m.craigie@abdn. No, it's not. It's m.craigie.22@abdn.ac.uk. Please do just get in touch if you have any questions, comments, or want to chat about the project at all. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for sharing that. That's such a valuable and important project to be involved in. So thank you. Look forward to hearing more about it and being involved in some way if possible. So it's, well, it cuts to the heart of basically a lot of the things that we're trying to do here with island studies in the Isles. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, next we have Anne Bevan, who is next door. And I've got Anne's PowerPoint here, so I'll just first of all see if I can share it, and then if it appears on the screen, Anne, then you can start telling us about things. So
Lovely.
Hold on just a wee second.
Is the sound working okay?
Yes, that should, yeah.
Right. Hi, folks. Yeah, I'm a visual artist and I lead in the curriculum at Orkney College, UHI here. So I'm going to speak to some images because that's what I work with, and hopefully Andrew's able to pull them up. So, yeah. So while he's doing that, there's an interesting overlap with this network, which I'm afraid I haven't been part of, or actually sort of been involved in any of the previous discussions, but connected up with the DEL, with our HRC network recently, which is looking at creative landscape futures, and that's a collaboration with Aberdeen University. So some, and I mean, already some really interesting sort of overlaps and connections. There we go. So let's.
No, it's got the. Hang on a second. It's opened. There we go. Slideshow.
In there. So yeah. So I just wanted to, I'll try not to, because I'll show you images of my work, but try to kind of connect in with some of the questions that we're thinking about today. So very briefly, I'm a visual artist. I work but very much in an interdisciplinary way. I work a lot with collaboration. I'm also involved very much with education and with different approaches to what artistic practice might be. Oh, I'll have to give you instructions, Andrew. So if you want to move on to the next slide, sorry, don't have the clicker here. So just to say, in my practice, sort of background in sculpture, but in terms of my research, I've been really interested in systems, in environment, in place. Image here of a project, 23 years ago, you see, there you go. Seems like yesterday. Which was connecting with, at the time, East of Scotland Water, and here now Scottish Water, looking at the kind of archaeology, the history of the water systems that supplied the city of Edinburgh. So just thinking really about how, what industry might be. We're, deemed I'm part of the creative industries, which I have to confess I don't like that term at all. But we're talking today about scale of industry, and I think a lot of the scale of industry might be hidden underground, as in the case of water systems. But I think from a visual arts practice, I'm really interested in kind of continuing that archaeological metaphor and kind of digging up and maybe excavating those stories and histories which we all connect into. And the reason for doing this project was because I was just interested in where does this water that we take for granted, where does it come from? Anyway, if you want to move on to the next slide, please, Andrew. Thanks. So, Orkney, I lived in Edinburgh for a big chunk of my adult life, returned to Orkney because of opportunities with jobs here, and also very interested in connecting with the renewable industries and with the whole research into water. I'll not go into detail about these projects, so if we can kind of keep them moving, Andrew, it's probably fine. This is a project based at the Peer Arts Centre. I might say, just while we're here, that connections to arts organisations are really vital. So we're so lucky to have a really international world leading gallery in Stromness, and who work out with Stromness and also with local artists and groups. So that is kind of vital. My connections with thinking about water and where it comes from obviously connects, especially when I came back to Orkney, with the sea and with energy and with, again, the things that are just part of our daily lives, the tides, the waves, and experimenting and playing, basically. So I do equate work with play. Industry might, what kind of industry might need to have a lot of play and experimentation. So if you move on again. Next, I'll just say next, Andrew, just to speed. Also, just thinking about back to the idea of interdisciplinary working, but really, I mean, that's a kind of grand term thing. In Orkney, I think anybody that grew up here would have had a very strong connection with the poets, with musicians, with artists, fishermen, farmers. You know, it's we grow up, we live in a very sort of interdisciplinary life, I would say, which is just life, which is how I think it should be. So, a poem here by amazing Robert Rendell. Next, please. And when I returned, I was really fortunate to apply for an opportunity, which was a HRC-funded interdisciplinary project, which was called Orkney, Beside the Ocean of Time. Pulling on the title of the novel by George Mackay-Brown, and I basically used and worked with the kind of local, the shoreline where I grew up, as a kind of studio, an experimental space to have conversations, to think about time, obviously, deep time as well, in terms of the geology here. We're looking at 400 million year old ripples captured in rock. And very much using it. It was over, well, at least a period of a year, if not longer, but it's kind of ongoing. The opportunity to be a kind of artist in residence at home. So that idea of artists and practitioners, academics, researchers being embedded, literally just working at home, having that, I hope, sort of consideration of the future. So thinking about future time, deep time, as well as past deep time. Next, please, Andrew. And just some of the kind of photographic images of works which were, in a sense, just moments in time, not permanent works. Next, please. And working with scale and thinking about things underwater, things appearing and disappearing. I worked with video, collaborated with Mark Jenkins, who some of you might know, on video works. And if there's time later on, I could maybe show you some over the break or something like that. But again, working with the Peer Arts Centre Gallery as the kind of institution who helped to support the project. Next, please. And works that keep going, so iterations of work. So the workshop we had in Stromness a few weeks ago, we had a sort of first performance, if you like, of a new composition by Gemma McGregor, who's on the flute there, which was a response to the video. This connects very much to, in my mind anyway, to these sort of maybe more difficult questions about time in the future and how we might visualise or interpret and understand things such as energy, renewables. How do we explore those questions as a community? Next, please, Sandra. Forgotten how many slides to put in here. Okay, yeah. I'll try to. You can just tell me to stop at a certain point because it's not going. So, also interested in the kind of invisible, and this is part of a project that's called Things Unseen, looking at the sort of microscopic environment, the microecology of the sea, and how we might visualise that. So very much again collaborative project with scientists and experts at Edinburgh University. Again, working with poets and inviting responses here from Alan Spence. But just putting this image in here, it reminded me, and just thinking about today, a lot of you, because I think there's quite a few Arcadians in the room, but it was certainly part of our school curriculum anyway for some time, was the novel Greenbow by George Mackay-Brown, where he, he explores this local community, which could be our community of Stromness that we grew up in, and the characters, but then this kind of threat of a massive industrialisation of the landscape. And he talks about this invisible black star. So anyway, this image here is not directly, it was not made in response to this, but it's a coincidence that just thinking about the black star that George describes. I might, have we got time just to read you a couple of lines from that book? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I just think, just to maybe put, because this is a literary context, and this was written in 72, I think, certainly in the 70s. So, we're talking about quite a while ago, 50 odd years ago. 50 years ago. So anyway, I'll just pick up this towards the end of the book, when the threat is becoming closer. A phrase, black star, was uttered by one of the engineers over pints in Scorodale's one Friday night. That's the pub. It went from mouth to mouth in the following days, whispered as if it was a piece of magic, a very secret code word. Even the villagers used it. To them, it stood for the new music that had taken possession of Helia. In fact, there was nothing mysterious about it. Operation Black Star, that was how the word was openly described in advertisements for workers that appeared in the Arcadian and in the window of Mr. Joseph Evy's store. After 6 weeks of pile driving and crane swinging, the pier got a temporary wooden extension, and after that larger boats could approach and tie up. Great cargoes of cement were unloaded, lorries, more hut sections, trains, bulldozers, transformers. So that's George's slightly fearful, I think, sort of vision of a future. Of course, it was also slightly visionary because not long after that we had a threat of uranium mining in Orkney, which provoked a huge protest movement among everybody. It involved artists, writers, and everybody in the community. If you want to just keep the next slides moving there, Andrew, I'll just continue it. So really just thinking again about those invisible, I think the word threat is, I'll use that with moderation because it's things that we can't see, such as the idea of the bulldozers coming in was a very visible kind of description of what might happen. But if you think about what's across the Firth and Dounreay with the nuclear power, with the nuclear isotopes, these invisible particles that exist and we don't see, and certainly on an industrial scale, I think artists and writers, musicians have got a really vital role to play in helping us to understand or to see or to at least bring a discussion to the surface in a different kind of way, alongside policymakers and politicians, economists, and all of the people that might be in the room today as well. I think there are more slides, but I think that's probably enough for now. I can't remember what else to put there, but we can. Oh, actually, I think that. Sorry, we'll just finish on that. Let's throw in a novel slide at the end. Big planted trees. I also live in a croft and thinking a lot about the future as I plant these trees, which maybe in 25 years' time might grow into more than a bush. But just thinking about the future generations. This is a wee drawing by my great niece, who was, I think, 7 at the time, and just thinking ahead to, and again, as Stacey was saying, the intergenerational communication. I think that's really something like planting trees really brings that into our kind of really immediate lives. So I shall pause there now, or stop. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the very thoughtful presentation and the beautiful images as well. So that is a really excellent insight, and it's, as you say, it's important to include creative practitioners and artists in this visualization of the future, because it helps us to think and helps us to avoid perhaps some of the more outrageous sort of economic possibilities. It helps us to think twice about some of the things that are on offer. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Now then, so there's some good questions and thoughts turning up in the chat as well. So I think what we'll do is we'll carry on with people's presentations, and then if those to whom the chat is directed, if you'd like to either just sort of answer that in the chat if you can, or if you want to pick it up and say something about it before we get into our sort of main discussion, then please do. So I've just finished the second Slido as well, and I'm going to be opening another one for you to just think about. And I say those in the room next door, if you have a thought, then you could feed it to Andrew, and maybe he can type it into the thing. So. Oh yes, there's also, as Rory's telling me here, on a different system, there's a mobile app as well. So if you've got your phone or a laptop with you, you can also access the Slido that way. Yeah, so I don't know if you can indeed if you knew what the code was. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe Rory can put that in the chat.
Put it in that message, but I can put it in this chat as well. But for anybody, it's just go to slido.com and then the code number is 9254726. And then you'll see a blue box near the top of the page that you enter that in. There's then a passcode that needs to be entered as well, which is 4 lowercase h, lowercase l, lowercase b, 5x. Lowercase x, that is.
I'm sure you've all memorised that.
If not, we'll
Just get in the chat. Rory, that'd be grand. Thank you very much. Okay, right now then. Next we have Luke Fraser from the North Ronaldsay Trust, and I believe, Luke, I've got your PowerPoint here as well. So I'll just find that.
Did you get that as well?
Has everyone got what they need? What's the fast?
4HLB5X.
Now, just hold on just a wee second. Just. Okay, nearly there. And where's it?
Do you want me just to kick off with a bit of background there?
Yes, that'd be great. Please introduce yourself, Luke. It's good to have you here.
Hello, I'm Luke Fraser. I work for the North Ronaldsay Trust as a community development manager. I'm also a senior consultant at Aquaterra, which is an environmental consultancy. I spent 16 years at Orkney Islands Council alongside Alistair and Adele for a fair chunk of that. I ran the council's house build programme, all our energy efficiency projects, all our demographic forecasting, and the housing needs and demand assessments and various bits and pieces there as well. So thank you very much. It's been really good here. Perfect. It's working. So what I wanted to do today was almost just touch on the 3 levels. It was really good when Andrew mentioned best and worst case scenarios, and I'm a bit of a kind of strategic out of the box, come up with ideas thing, and I love that quote about ideas for the future. If they're not kind of silly and out there, they're probably wrong. So I quite like that. And so what I really wanted to focus on, it's quite a big presentation, Andrew, so it'll probably take a little minute, is almost that national and international level, then down to an island community level, then almost down to a small island like North Ronaldsay, and how those areas of impact we've got. So when this loads up, the first slide is a silly one, in a sense that it is almost that worst case possible scenario. It's building suspense here. It's not. It is very honest. It's just that it's got a lot of pictures. I hate slides that have got lots of text and no pictures in, but that does mean this presentations end up being huge. But a lot of it, again, on that national, international level, is some of the things we can't impact on. So, or we have minimal impact, minimal ability to impact. So you've got things like pandemics. You've got things like very poor political leadership. You've got stuff like what's going on with Russia and China and the Western world at the moment, all that posturing, which could go, you know, in the worst case scenario, could go hot war. You've got climate change. You've got rise of AI. You've got various other bits and pieces there that are out with our ability to influence, but will have significant influence on our communities if they get to those far end of that element. So there are, again, when this thing's going to load, it's taking its time. When we get down to island level, even if you just roll through them, Andrew, it might not need the full blown.
Yeah, I'll just see what's happening here. So
There's always one, and it's usually me. So,
Well, just a wee second. So let's see. Why is it taking such a long time? Okay. Tell you what, if I could download it maybe onto my computer, that might be quicker. I think it's okay. Ah, there we go. Got something. Okay, here we go. I'll try again. Guess that one. Okay. Oh, where's the present button?
It's still not loaded. If you scroll down to slide 3, I'll just talk through what's there until it loads up. That's it. So this is almost again focused on the worst case and best case, just to kind of around what the opportunities and what the potential issues are. So for Orkney, as I've looked at split community into community and economy. Oh, that might work now. Split community and economy there. And as has been mentioned already, both by Marcus and by Alistair, Orkney's population is bucking the trend, but the forecasts are for it to our demographic to really fall off a cliff. So worst case scenario is very much that demographic shift does happen. We lose a lot of our young working age people, and we have a significant older age population, which is unable to support itself and also the economy there. Our infrastructure is in no way climate ready, with funding being diverted to higher population areas south. So London, Glasgow, all those areas that are right on the water that are going to need significant investment to offset the sea level rises and flooding. We don't even come anywhere near the top of that, of the priority list there. We're rolled into a combined council area with Shetland or Caithness, and the Scottish Government continue to centralise service provision, and that costs significant jobs on the islands, but also worsens our service provision here. Things like carbon credits, digital currencies, hugely restrict what households can do and what travel options we have. Because of things like they're built for urban areas, you've got public transport, you don't need to own a car. Whereas out in rural areas, unless autonomous vehicles come along, we do need private transport because there is no alternative. So there's massive opportunities for disadvantage there. And also transport links to mainland UK have worsened. See the Western Isles ferries issue at the moment is a significant issue. Our ferry fleet is maybe 15, 20 years behind it. But then you shift to the best case scenario for the community as our demographic is balanced and improved. We have the opportunity. We know the demographic issue is coming. Things around housing, things around employment. We've balanced that demographic, and people that want to live here, and there are lots of them, have the ability to do so. Our infrastructure is as climate ready as it can affordably be. We're never going to get fully climate ready, but any new infrastructure that's developed is done in a way that gets it away from floodplains or gets it away from where areas that are going to be issue for extreme weather or the like. We retain our own council, and we have a broader range of locally controlled powers. So we've got more democratic ability to do stuff and make decisions on our own islands. We've strong and sustainable transport links within the community. So electrification, we've carried that on. There's hydrogen opportunities, and also mainland UK and beyond as well. And the bits behind the picture, the expansion of the main airport is a key one of that. So we're looking at lengthening and strengthening the runway. Gives us more connections to our Arctic neighbours, enhances our ability for high value tourism, but also allows us to have those connections elsewhere. And as we're doing at the minute, lots of research and innovation around hydrogen and electric aircraft. Next one, please, Andrew. So this is moving on to the worst case for the economy. The opportunities to benefit from offshore wind, which we'll come to in a second, have been bypassed, so we've missed them. Key industries like oil and gas haven't been replaced. So some of our key high-value industries just haven't been replaced, and we've lost them to other parts of Scotland and the rest of the world. Our economy doesn't keep pace with things that change around AI, remote working, internet connectivity being huge issues, and that reduces our competitive standing even further than it already is. We're still reliant on national and international market for the vast majority of our goods, as that was mentioned already. I know from the Barbados position of we're importing more. Where the just-in-time model of provision is stretched even further, climate change bites that worse. It makes it more difficult to deliver. And because of that, we're hugely vulnerable to external economic, climate and geopolitical shocks. So we're still hugely attached to, again, those national, international things. At a household level, income's dropped, unemployment's risen, the growth of AI has meant rural and island areas are increasingly left behind, and also central government, their main interest in us is as a power station to power those urban areas south at whatever cost that might be to the local community. Now moving on to the good part, the best case is offshore wind has been a success. We've got strong locally based support and maintenance, supply and maintenance and supply chain and various things are all there. We've been able to utilise AI and other advances to the benefit of our economy, but also of our population and people's lives. We've got a strong remote working economy. That's one of the key things, one of the only benefits COVID has brought us, is the ability now for small island communities with decent internet connectivity and a housing stock to say to households, move here, because bring your job with you. And those jobs are generally quite high paying roles. So we've had that ability to keep pace with other areas, but also we're a destination of choice for people looking for work-life balance change. We're one of those areas where people can really come in and say, yeah, we want the work, we can do that remotely, and we want the life balance that goes with it. We produce more of what we eat locally by the traditional agriculture sector we've got, which is hugely strong, but we're also bringing the vertical farming and community growing into the equation as well. And economic and climate and geopolitical shocks don't have the same impact because of that enhanced resilience and also enhanced planning cooperation between ourselves and Shetland and Western Isles and Caithness as well. And we've also got that flexible local energy grid, which makes the most of renewable energy developed here. We're using it here with cheap transport, heating, power, but also we use that and we create things like green hydrogen and other fuels. We export those. We don't export the basic electricity. I've said for a while, Orkney, we're a brilliant place for growing grass and silage, but we don't export silage. We export cattle that we feed the silage on, so we increase the value of that product before we sell it. But with electricity, we're currently just selling the base product very cheaply and then buying it back very, very expensive. So that's one of the key issues there. Next one, please, Andrew. I'll run along and try and finish this off. Next bit, quick touch on offshore wind, again around industrialisation, significant opportunities to develop additional infrastructure on Orkney to support offshore wind. So top one there is a council's proposed plan for a new pier. My house is actually in the background, so that's very near me. On the other side, that's the mega wind hub. You see those two red and orange vessels in the first picture? They're the small things right here in the bottom corner. So that's a huge piece of potential floating offshore wind development. And then the floater oil terminal at the bottom, looking at hydrogen things there as well. So huge opportunities for new industrialisation. But also, if that is to happen, we need some of our existing infrastructure needs enhanced and supporting as well. New housing, new sewage treatment, various other things to enhance and allow us to do that. And again, I've mentioned airport. Next one, please, Andrew. I'll try and rattle through this next bit. This is very quickly on to North Ronaldsay. Small island, growing population, about 50 people. There are weekly ferry connections, twice weekly in summer, and 3 small flights a day. We have famous seaweed-eating sheep, which is that top right-hand corner. Generally poor internet connectivity, which relies on things like microwave for alternatives, and that's very much held back the island's economy. And the main things are agriculture, tourism and craft are the main industries out there. Next one, please, Andrew. So drilling down into a small island area, a lot of it's the same as Orkney. Growing population in terms of best case. Growing population, climate resilient infrastructure, community farming, fast IT facilities, really good on-island transport, remote work being a key source of employment for many and key in social income. Things like drone deliveries, enhanced the little aircraft again under the picture, that's a hydrogen plane. Enhancements in transport to make deliveries more efficient and automated and cost less. Strong, thriving local community, entirely local smart grid with generation, battery storage, smart heating and everything all input in there, and also transport too, and an energy efficient retrofitted housing stock and building stock. So the island is future proofed as it can be for what is coming through climate change and also other external shocks, things like the cost of living crisis we've had. Next one, please, Andrew. And last one for me, the worst case scenario for North Ronaldsay, well, in one word, uninhabited. It's pretty much by 2050, everybody's had to leave. It's the worst case scenario. The bottom picture there is a Swona between Orkney and Caithness, and that happened to that island in the 60s. But if we can retain the population, the worst case scenario is the older population that's there can't sustain itself. The economy's struggled, been left behind by the wider UK and international market and economy. The IT infrastructure is still lagging way behind, but is even more important by 2050 to be able to keep pace with that. And that has made it even less competitive. We've lost the unique North Ronaldsay sheep breed. Transport connections have been reduced further due to cost. We've lost the school. And if those two things happen, it makes it much more difficult to attract new islanders, and also significant impact from climate change. There's no investment in that infrastructure, just because of the fact that that funding is being spent elsewhere, where the per capita increase, per capita input is significantly higher. That's me.
Thank you very much indeed, Luke. That's superb. I mean, you've itemised most of the things I'm sure we're going to be coming up in the next two discussion sessions. So you've given us a huge body of material to deal with and to think about, and the way that you've set it out with the best and the worst cases for Orkney gives us the opportunity to think about it for Shetland and the Western Isles as well. So yeah, fabulous. Thank you very much indeed. And I'll just stop sharing just now. And I see that Debbie has joined us. So welcome, Debbie. It's great to have you with us. We've just been, people have been talking about what they do and what their roles are in industry in the islands and in development and in academia. And no one has broached the question of space yet. So it's wonderful to have you with us to tell us about what's happening at Saxavord Spaceport. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'll apologise, I'm not as familiar with WebEx, so I couldn't formally mute myself as easily as you seem to be able to do it in Teams. So apologies for that. I was just trying to be quiet, but thank you very much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. So what we're doing, it would be wonderful to hear from you then. What's happening at Saxavord at the moment, and what your plans are for the future, and perhaps how do you see UNST in 2050?
No, certainly happy to do that, and I'm sorry I can't be on the call for longer, and there's just a huge amount going on. I'm going to show my lack of technical knowledge. I'm going to just try and share. Can I just share? Does it work the same as Teams? Or, yeah.
They all work vaguely in the same way, but there's always little quirks.
I know. I'll give it a go. If it doesn't work immediately, I'm going to give up. But it just shows what the piece of infrastructure that's on site that some people may not have seen. And I thought I'd had it ready. It's no right. It's not going to do it. So I'm not going to do that. It just sort of shows the scale of what we're up to. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Saxavord Spaceport. We were previously called Shetland Space Centre, but Saxavord Spaceport is what we are. So my job is really both building and growing a company, and it is very fast growing, and at the same time being involved in a whole array of different roles, from sustainability to education to contingency planning to tourism, visitor management. As ever with a small business, everyone has to take on multiple roles to ensure we keep the momentum. And as we grow, we bring in individuals to maybe have a greater focus on particular aspects. But those are the areas that I cover, as well as sort of the corporate governance of the company and setting up all our processes and systems, ISO accreditation, everything alongside building the spaceport. And just to give you an idea of the growth, December 20, we were a team of 10, and I just looked at the payroll just to get an idea of our breakdown of Shetland people, and we're about 55. So from 10 to 55 in 2 years. So huge growth and exciting growth. And I looked at the agenda that you sent to me, and looking at the scale of development on islands and how and why and whether it's appropriate. And I just wondered about turning it round and sort of coming in at the angle of, maybe the scale isn't necessarily the issue, as long as the company itself is committed to the community and, the historical sort of background and that effort to engage, understand, work with the community and go beyond what a company would normally do, and people sort of expect a company just to be focused on their business objectives. And if that company goes wider and really does engage with the community, then maybe, you know, a greater scale of industry is more acceptable. That was just my immediate thought. However, despite the fact that we're building a spaceport, it's not necessarily at the scale as you might imagine. And when we started this process 5 years ago, we were very conscious of trying to say to the community, we're not building Cape Canaveral. And because it's also new, of course, at that time, you just Google spaceports, of course, Cape Canaveral comes up, and the community were concerned that that's what we were going to do. So not at that scale, you know, appropriate to sort of for UK launch. So just a couple of minutes on sort of the background, because some may not understand why Shetland, why us, why now. So 5 years ago, the UK government brought out the SEPTA report, which had done a review of the possible sites for vertical launch. And Saxe-Ford came out as the top site, came out as the top site for sun-synchronous and polar orbits. And basically from a safety point of view, because we are at the very north of Shetland, there is nothing in the way when we launch. There is nothing to overfly, no populations. Excuse me.
That's okay, have a glass of water.
I have got a glass of water here, actually, I'll do that too. So it recognised that our site was the best, safest, and when the exclusion zone comes into place for a launch, you know, there are no people who have to move out of houses. It is without doubt the best place in the UK, if not Europe, and that's why the initiative is going ahead. We're a private company, 100% privately funded. Unfortunately, very little assistance from the economic development agencies that you would hope that would have engaged, but we are able to progress, and we have done, and in some ways the benefit of that is we can be more agile and more responsive, and that's how it's been working so far. So quite unusual actually throughout the world to be a privately funded spaceport. And we have a mixture of shareholders, and probably for anyone who has looked at our background, we are fortunate. Anders Poulsen, the highly regarded Danish entrepreneur, is investing in us, and that is hugely helpful, you know, with his knowledge and obviously land ownership elsewhere in Scotland, and the effort that he's done on rewilding and tourism and what have you. So he's not an active part of the company. He's certainly at arm's length, but that's hugely helpful for us alongside the other private investors we have involved. So I think the best way to sort of describe it is, so the site Lamennais is the peninsula, the far north of Unst, the most northerly inhabited island, and it's actually on the site of the former RAF Score, which was a World War II site. So, you know, it's a site that already has sort of buildings and historic monuments on to a certain extent, and that's been a challenge for us to make sure that the siting of the launch pads are primarily in the safest position possible, but wherever possible, we have not removed any of the ancient monuments. I think we've had to remove three small buildings right at the very end, but that's been work with Historic Environment Scotland to make sure that they're content that we've done as minimal sort of disruption to the site and within it. And that's actually an aspect that I love when I'm on site, that you have got an old World War II bunker alongside a new piece of concrete and a massive great launch store. You know, you've got those two going, and really the reasons for the selection of the site for this ties in with why it was a prime site for World War II for detection of enemy aircraft coming into UK airspace. And we're also working from what was the old RAF Saxe-Ford. It shut down, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago. And so the support services, the accommodation for the construction workers are all being housed there. So again, it's using what otherwise, who knows what otherwise it would have be used for. So it's the reuse of existing sites and the redevelopment of sites that are already there, and including the use of Baltersound Airport, which we use for engine tests at the moment. We have a French company doing engine tests at Baltersound, and we have a German company today actually back again doing engine tests at Skatster Airport. So for those of you who might not be aware, when a rocket when they're hugely technical, but the build-up is the running of the engine over a certain period of time to keep the momentum, to see whether the technical advancements are happening as they are. So there's a lot of engine testing that goes on. Skatster Airport had been shut by the council, so we have leased it and it's being used for engine tests. So it's sort of bringing back to life some of the infrastructure that could not be afforded to be kept open, basically, with the changes in the oil and gas in Shetland. So that's basically what is happening. So it's the construction of the site. We put in our planning application in 2021. It took a year. We got our planning through last March in 22. And by December, we had the construction of the first vertical launch pad in Europe with the launch stall in place, which is a fantastic achievement with the construction workers that were involved to do that. So in our planning application, and these figures, of course, out of date now because the planning took considerable time, but the figures for sort of economic development was enhanced sort of 4.9 million GVA and 139 jobs. In Shetland, 7.5 million GVA, 209 jobs, and then Scotland, 9.3 million and 255 jobs. But as I say, we need to update those figures because that was done with the planning application. And certainly since then, we've learned a huge amount about how things are developing. The team wasn't experienced in the space sector, so we've learned a huge amount in a short space of time, and an understanding of what the rocket companies will want as regards services and personnel and what have you. So that's still all coming through at the moment. So when you build a spaceport and to be able to launch a rocket, there are 4 licenses involved. And this takes a huge amount of time. We have 5 people working on a spaceport license to make sure every aspect is considered, from safety, security, the technical, the absolutely everything. The license has been with the Civil Aviation Authority, who of course are doing it for the first time too. And if people had picked up the launch at Cornwall, that's very different. Cornwall was a horizontal launch where the rocket was strapped below an aircraft. So in effect, it was at Newquay Airport. It was an aircraft taking off with a rocket underneath it, whereas ours will be the typical vertical rocket. So the spaceport license, we hope to have with us within the next few weeks, allowing us to launch up to 30 times a year, and leaving us flexibility to work with any rocket company that comes to us. And at the moment, we're engaged with 7 different rocket companies throughout Europe and America. The UK Pathfinder launch, being led and facilitated by Lockheed Martin, is working with an American company, ABL Systems. So this again is different. It's just worth sharing because Cornwall was in the news fairly recently. What Cornwall did is prove that the UK actually has done a great job. It is now able to license a spaceport. The regulations are there. The CAA is able to do that. Newquay Airport did everything that they needed to do. The anomaly, as they call it in space terms, that happened was Virgin Orbit's sort of failure, just being blunt. Wouldn't say that outwardly, but that's where the anomaly happened. And unfortunately, the spaceport license was linked to Virgin Orbit alone. We knew this. Don't think many people, because we're well aware. So it means basically Cornwall do not have a spaceport license any longer. So the emphasis now, turning towards us, hopefully we will be the first with a successful launch. Although if anybody watched Elon Musk yesterday with his huge rocket, it is just such a technical business, and I think it's important, and we're hoping the messaging is getting out that very, very complicated, and actually it's something like 80% of first launches for rockets fail. It's just hugely, hugely technical. So bringing it on, because I could go on for hours, Andrew, and I know that's not what you want, but we're so passionate about what we're doing, and generally people are excited and interested. But just bringing it back to the community. So myself and my husband bought the old RAF Saxavoord site when it was closed down by MOD. So we've been involved in having the converting the quarters into self-catering houses, a seasonal restaurant, a hostel accommodation, and we set up the UK's most northerly distillery, Shetland Real Gin, 8 years ago. So we have we don't live in Shetland all year round, but we certainly have the understanding of how to do business in Shetland and working with the community and that side of things, which I think has helped with building the spaceport, that people know us, and I hope they feel that we don't overpromise and we deliver on what we say we're going to deliver. So we've never really been that specific until we're clear on what number of jobs and what have you, because it's important not to raise expectations. So we have an education role within the company and a sustainability role. And in November, we took on a local graduate, Bryden Priest, from Unst as the Community Projects Officer, with funding from HIE, which is fantastic for a graduate placement. He's doing an excellent job. We have a regular newsletter to keep people updated, which is important, particularly for the locals. You can download it from our website, saxavoord.com. We started a Radio Saxavoord podcast almost as soon as we started. And what we've done in that, it's really important to us that people understand this is about a spaceport in Shetland. So as well as what we're doing, it's as equally important that people understand what life is like in Shetland. And so the people we invite on are asked about all sorts beside space and their involvement. And we've had visits recently from a pensioners group who we actually got out onto site. Really important to keep all those local contacts so people really understand what's going on. So we often get asked about our recruitment, and we have enough experience that really, if local people have the skills, they are absolutely the best people to employ. Sometimes it's not possible. So in our breakdown of our numbers on the payroll, which is about 55, half are based in Shetland. 9 of those, so let's just say sort of 27-ish, 9 of those are rotational, mainly hospitality, looking after, say, 30, 40 construction workers and archaeologists. So some of the Shetland jobs are hospitality because we have a big site and we need to ensure our builders are well looked after. But at the same time, some of the key roles are also Shetland workers, including the senior site engineer, the spaceport operations manager, the project manager for the build, the engine test manager, and the health and safety manager. Key roles are all Shetland folk, Shetland born and bred folk even. So there is a real commitment to try and fill the role possible in Shetland first, and then resorting to looking elsewhere if we need to. And alongside that, businesses are setting up to support Unst Plant Hire, specifically 3 local guys set up to work with the contractors that are developing the site. And when we have larger contracts, we're just about to let a contract for a launch rail. It'll go to Lerwick Engineering Company. So again, these companies exist. hugely involved in oil and gas or whatever, and those capabilities are absolutely transferable to the space sector, certainly in the construction phase. And we connect the Shetland businesses to the German and French rocket companies. And the best example is High Impulse were at Scatster. One of the regulators failed to work. They were all ready to go back to Germany, have a committee, work out what to do, etc., etc. Ocean Kinetics, based in Lerwick, were asked to come up, take a look, and the day after, 10 new regulators were with the German rocket company. And so it's real examples of that whole, as we all know, island mentality and can-do approach that, you know, and I think there's an excitement of these companies becoming involved in a sector that they perhaps never imagined they would do. And then finally, just, you know, this whole working with the community and seeing how we can give the benefits, certainly on the visitor management side. We're hugely fortunate that the council has really engaged and embraced the development of space. We have working groups with the council for education, economy, sustainability, contingency planning, and we have a tourism and promotion group, especially focusing on space, and the council funded some research on the visitor potential. And so our visitor management strategy has 4 aims. It's safety, security, environmentals, but fourthly, the opportunities that we can open up through the increased number of visitors, which we know will come, so that local community organisations and businesses will benefit too. And so they'll be part of the visitor management group to see how we can meet the expectations of the people who are going to come and watch the launch, and also make sure they have a good Shetland banner, cup of tea, well looked after, spend money, businesses will thrive, and all that sort of thing. So trying to ensure that also happens. And then at a slightly lesser level compared to the sort of direct link to operations, of course, with a company doing what we're doing, you know, we're open to some applications from the community on support for, say, a sports team or solar panels for the local church or what have you. You know, we don't have an endless budget, but there are certain things that we're happy to assist with as well. So that's a very quick run through. I don't know whether I've sort of balanced it here and there or whatever for you, but yeah, happy to take questions if there is any, or say some more, or shut up.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie, for giving us this overview of what an extraordinary enterprise that you're involved in, and you know, it's so exciting and so futuristic, and yet ties in with the history of Unst itself as an RAF base, and Shet is a place of high tech and industrial innovation as well. So it's really impressive. And I know that you don't have time to be with us to discuss, you know, to take part in the discussions more generally. So it would be great if you could answer a couple of questions if people have questions that they'd like to ask you just now. So are there any? Oh yes, yeah, Lynn, you've got your hand up.
Hello, yes, I'm sorry, I apologise, I was late to the meeting today and I only managed to join in partway through what you were saying, but it might be slightly controversial for me to ask, but you mentioned that Anders Poulsen was one of the folks who were the people given the financial backing to that, and you mentioned rewilding, which has been pretty controversial in the North Islands because many of the areas that he is rewilding, in inverted commas, were never supposed to be wild in the first place. So I just wonder if there has been any pushback from anybody on that, if anybody's actually picked up on that, or if it's just me.
I think, no, good point, Lynn. I was sort of mentioning him, yeah, in the context of what else he does in Scotland, and I don't think it would be right of me to comment on what he is doing elsewhere. If you mean, you know, well, if you want to know, you know, have we got everybody 100% behind us, or are there concerns on what is done in relation to the spaceport, which obviously isn't rewilding, I can certainly just say a bit about that, but I wouldn't like to comment on, you know, I live part of my time in Shetland, part of my time in Grantham-on-Space, so I have some experience of what he's doing, certainly in Glenfeshie in the national park, which I understand people really admire and respect, but I can assume it's not like, it's never like that everywhere, of course. From our point of view on the environmentals, we're very aware. We feel, you know, we have got years of now survey work on the birds and data and what have you. We know more, you know, and the team of ecologists know more about the site now than anybody ever might have done, to be honest, you know, officially recorded, which can only be a good thing. And we monitor that very, very closely, especially in the construction phase. We have an on-site ecological clerk of works who's out there with the construction workers. So, and there are people from a rewilding point of view. Of course, we're bringing something into an area that nobody would have imagined more than 5 years ago, to be honest. So there are concerns, and I say largely came back to the understanding of how this is actually going to operate, what size of rocket, you know, the gas is involved and what have you. And to be honest, which I had talked about, and to be honest, it's far lesser scale than something like Cape Canaveral, which also has its challenges with local, you know, sort of habitats and wildlife and what have you. I don't know, but I don't feel as I'm the person to comment really on his rewilding efforts in other parts of Scotland.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you for an awkward question, Lynn. That was good. Any other questions for Debbie? How about the Orcadians who are missing out on the space boom?
Yeah, I don't know, does Orkney realise that they were mentioned in the sector report, in the same report that identified us at number 1? Orkney was mentioned.
Which site in Orkney, do you know?
Oh, do you know, that's bad of me. I can certainly find out. Yeah,
It's probably what's not going.
Big nightmare to drink that, but I don't think where else.
I can certainly let you know. It, as I say, it was yeah. It's number 2 site after Shetland. But that's awful. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to find out rather than try and guess and probably get it wrong.
Tell you what, if it was North Royalty and I'd have been in post at the time, we would have been charging for things like roll-on, roll-off ferry and various other things to try and improve it. But it is, I suppose, it's a bit of a different kettle of fish up with us. But no, it seems really interesting. It's certainly something that will hopefully help Shetland and beyond as well.
Yeah. Because the other aspect which we don't always forget, but because launch is the real sort of topical and exciting side of things, the business also has put into place ground stations. So for the downloading of data, which is really important in a whole load of things, not least climate change, and being able to monitor that and get accurate update, accurate data. So at the moment we have 2 antennae at Baltersound Airport, and they've been functioning 2 years in July, downloading data for other people to understand, and that's a really important part, and we want to grow that side of the business too, because the location that means we're right for launch is also the reasoning why it's a prime spot for downloading data, because when satellites pass overhead, we're in the position that at 60 degrees north that we can download maybe 12, 14 times a day, whereas somewhere, say it's Surrey satellites down in Guildford, would be maybe 5 or 6 times. So getting access to this data, which people crucially need, whether they're making a decision on whether they're going to take out part of a crop because it's been frost damaged, which will then prevent the rest of the field from being down. These really crucial decisions that need really recent data, that sort of thing, it is another side of the business which will be as equally important as launch, but maybe not as exciting to many. And then so the third element is the hotel side. because we were with the council yesterday, presenting the sort of the diagrams for the redevelopment, not total redevelopment of the old RAF Sax wards. So we will reuse as much as we can, but some of it will need to be demolished and replaced, so that we will have a hotel suitable for today's standards for the rocket companies and all their workers, but also for the visitors that we want to continue to attract for the reasons people always visit Shetland, for the, well, and then the same way for Orkney, you know, everything, you know, we still want to have accommodation available to them too. We want to have the two side by side.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie. That's superb. And the mention of tourism actually brings us on to our next speaker. So thank you very much for that inadvertent link. So yeah, we'll be watching with great interest the developments that are taking place in Unst, and if the hotel gets you know, developed further, then who knows, we might well be organising summer schools and things like that to come up and see what's happening. So thank you very much indeed.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you. Goodbye. I'm going to have to head off. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Debbie.
Bye.
So there's a spaceport being developed in Canso, Nova Scotia. Thank you, Laurie. We'll maybe chat about that shortly. But first, we're a little bit sort of behind now, but it doesn't matter. We're going to be flexible in this workshop, but we want to hear from people before we start sort of getting engaged in the discussion. And actually, with Luke's PowerPoint, I might stick that back on as sort of the potential negative future so that we can discuss. So we'll do that shortly. Those who are in the room next door, you know, help yourself to coffee. I see that's already been poured out. Someone might want to bring me one. That'd be good. Otherwise, everyone, just let's move on. And Steve, I see you haven't got your camera there, but I'm hoping that you're there. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, okay. Well, I think Debbie's a pretty hard act to follow, to be honest with you. I think I'd have preferred to be on before her. But having said that, I think it's a shame she's gone, because I might try and share. I've just got 3 slides I've put together, and I might try and share that if that's okay, because I've actually got a couple of them are from Unst. And one of them is a nice graphic of Lamberness, the actual launch site. So
fabulous!
It might just illustrate it a little bit. So let me just try and do that first of all. I should say that I am the development manager for Visit Scotland, based in Lerwick, based in Shetland. So that's my role here. Hold on a second. Let me try and. Screen. Let's see. I can. Tap to preview. Okay, what the hell does this all mean?
I don't know. I can't see your screen, Steve.
I might be able to. Hang on a sec. Let me just try this.
Something's coming up. There we go. Yes, we can see that.
Is it? Is that just in a small square, or is that on the full screen?
On the full screen.
Oh, is it? Right. Okay. Okay. Well, in that case, maybe I'll change what I was going to say slightly. This is a picture of Hermanus, which is right at the very north of Unst. This is going to illustrate. I will talk about this in a second, but in relation to Lamberness and the spaceport, this is actually just a couple of miles away. Across to the west from the spaceport, and I think one of the things to point out here is that Shetland is quite it's not mountainous, but it's a hilly landscape compared to Orkney. So perhaps if you're thinking in terms of where a spaceport lies and how visible it is, in terms of Unst, it's actually quite remote, and it's not overtly visible from all parts of Unst. So a place like Hermanus, which is a national nature reserve, and where we've been doing a little bit of work, which kind of leads into what I was just going to talk about. It's one of these things. It kind of illustrates maybe how nature can sit together with the new technology and with an industry like the space industry. So anyway, I'll just say a couple of things. What I was going to talk about. I'm going to be much narrower, I think, in what I'm saying than a lot of the speakers who've kind of broadly been speaking about what's happening in the future. What I was actually going to talk about there was one trend in particular in tourism at the moment, which is the trend of sustainable and responsible tourism. So responsible tourism, this is really it's in reaction, I suppose, to the climate emergency that we have. That's one of the drivers, and obviously a lot of places like Unst, places like Shetland, Orkney are going to be very vulnerable to some of what climate change is going to bring us. So I think some of those impacts. So in relation to that, I think that Visit Scotland is certainly trying to push responsible tourism, sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism, basically, you're holidaying in a kind of eco-green, environmentally friendly way. Responsible tourism that we're pushing is where you actually consider the wider impact your trip has on the country you're visiting, and I suppose the world in general. People who choose to travel responsibly are helping in general to protect the landscape, but they're also boosting the local economy, and the money they're putting into the local economy is hopefully providing funding for a lot of those new and innovative projects that we hope are going to sustain tourism over the following years. What it basically means is that they consider visiting places like Shetland and Orkney at those less popular times of the year, maybe, discovering more places off the beaten track, because we all know that we've got a lot of famous and iconic landmarks, locations, which get really busy in the summer, really popular. And responsible tourism, I suppose the base of that would be to visit them in the quieter months, maybe in the spring, the autumn and the winter rather than the summer. If you're visiting in the summer, then what we're hoping people will do is look at those lesser known places, as I said, off the beaten track. Another side to this is not to be one of those tourists that just comes and goes. We're trying to promote longer tourism, longer holidays, where people can actually take their time. We're calling it slow tourism, but it also leads into what we want, the authentic experiences that people can get in these kind of communities. So choosing your time so that you're maybe coming at a quieter time of year, and maybe giving yourself that little bit of extra time when you actually get into these communities. People are using public transport options rather than traveling in their own vehicles. And we know that there are electric cars and buses, coaches. We don't have trains, obviously, in the North Isles, but we are trying to promote more walking, cycling, footpaths, which is going to bring me on to some of the developments that we're actually looking at in Shetland. And one of the things I was going to mention was the communities themselves, because the communities themselves are under pressure, and I think we heard that from when we were hearing from Luke, I think, talking about the pressures on some of the outer isles and those communities that are in danger of disappearing altogether. Some of these holidays that we're we're looking for people to do are maybe looking at conservation and volunteering holidays, where you can really get into the community itself. And what we actually know is that the communities in Shetland are extremely important in terms of what they give to the industry and also to the visitors. I think I may be, in a second, I'm not in the actual PowerPoint, but
oh, that's
are you still seeing that? Okay,
we can see the first slide.
okay, let me just see if I can. Okay, this is not moving on. Let me just see if I can get this.
That's it.
How's that?
That's it moving, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so sorry, I've waffled on a bit about the responsible and sustainable tourism. So in Shetland, our community groups are not only important in terms of information that they give. We have a network of about a dozen local museums and heritage centres around the islands that are really important for giving out information to visitors. But also some of these community groups are undertaking some really important projects, which only they will be able to really, looking at the structure of tourism and how it's going to go forward. Those community groups are going to be the important ones in terms of factoring in funding and then taking on projects. And the ones I've mentioned here are ASTA, which is, they've actually applied for funding from Visit Scotland's Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, and they are just this month opening a new campsite near Scalloway, which is the kind of second biggest settlement in Shetland. Those kind of things are not taken on. It's very difficult in this kind of economic climate for individual private companies to take these kind of things on, and it certainly won't be something that the local authorities will be doing either. So that's that increasing importance of communities. The Wild Skies there, I've mentioned, they're actually in Unst as well, so that again is relevant to the spaceport, and they are putting together a sky trail of listening, of audio benches and audio posts. So taking advantage of some of the wild weather that we get, which again is extending things out. It's not just summer. Some of those Wild Skies, a lot of those are more winter based, especially when it comes to things like Aurora. And of course, it fits in nicely with that narrative on the development of the spaceport. I've said Saxford Spaceport. I knew Debbie was talking, so I won't talk anything about that, except that is a little graphic underneath there. It's not a real picture, it's been put together, but that lower picture is Lamberness, so that is the actual peninsula where the launch pads are based. At this time, when this picture was put together, the actual launch pads were not built, so you can't see them, but that maybe gives you an idea of where the spaceport is, and that's a nice little representative rocket going up there, so that probably gives you a little idea of what we're looking forward to there. The Shetland Way is, we have just produced a feasibility study on a long distance walking route through Shetland, which will run right from the airport in the very south at Sunborough up to Hermanus, which was the first picture that I showed you. It'll be roughly 116 miles. We're only at the feasibility stage at the moment, but that would fit in again with this future trend that we've got for the sustainable tourism, and looking at ways that we can get around some of the issues that we have in terms of capacity on the ferry, on our external ferry. Shetland can only at the very maximum get 600 folk in a day, and I think if you compare that to Orkney, and that we're talking ferries here and not planes, I think Orkney can get 3,600 or something like that per day. So Shetland is obviously very limited in that capacity. It doesn't look like we're going to get new ferries in the short term, so we have to be a bit more creative, and maybe one of the ways is to encourage more walkers to come so that they don't bring their cars with them, which is obviously greener, and it frees up that car deck as well for other vehicles. So we're hoping that that's going to be an important step forward for tourism here, and it fits in with things like active travel initiatives as well. So again, we're bringing in that responsible tourism, we're bringing in that the healthy aspect, and it's definitely greener rather than encouraging people to bring their cars. So it's very, very much not a North Coast 500 type of project. ARTIF projects, I've already mentioned ASTA, which was the campsite in Scalloway, ARTIF being the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund. And that, I won't go back to it because I had trouble moving the pictures, but that boardwalk that you might have seen on Hermaness was another project that we funded there, and with ourselves and the natural cultural heritage fund from Nature Scott. That was just under £1 million project. Again, hopefully everything there is made sustainably. It's recycled, a recycled type of plastic. I don't know what it's called. It's probably not plastic, it's a composite, but it's supposed to have a very long lifespan. So again, hopefully that will be long lasting. I've mentioned there, that should be Crucible of Iron Age, not Iron Age. Crucible of Iron Age Shetland, which is, again, it's looking at the past, which is this picture on the left of Musa Broch, and also Jarlshof, which is one of our archaeological sites, and Old Scatness. The three of those form something called the Crucible of Iron Age Shetland, and we've just recently heard that they are remaining on the tentative list for UNESCO World Heritage Site status. So that will be important to us going forward. It's obviously something from the past, but as we're only on the tentative list, it's probably going to be at least 10 years before a decision is made. So again, maybe by 2050, we might have that kind of World Heritage status that we're looking for. Geopark Shetland, that's where we do have UNESCO status at the moment. We are one of only 2 geoparks in Scotland, and going forward again, that looking at the sustainable, the responsible tourism, developing the geopark and the amazing geology that we have in Shetland is going to be a strong factor. The last one I put there, I've mentioned Jarlshof and I've mentioned STIDP. That means the Shetland Tourism Infrastructure Development Plan, which I know there is one in Orkney and it's already up and running. We've got one developing here, which is where we're looking long term at the infrastructure in Shetland and what is needed in order to have a thriving tourism industry. So anyway, I've probably gone over time, so I'll. Oh, sorry, there was one other slide. If I can get onto it, this was just really looking at how technology is changing things. These are a couple of things which are incredibly popular, but that we can't really market because of that unpredictability. And orcas and cetaceans around the islands, and the aurora, obviously in the winter months. And we're in a period now of several years of intense sunspot activity where aurora should be pretty good for the next few years. But if you look here, what we do actually have is a bar chart of orca sightings from the last 5 years that shows that we actually have orca activity all year round. So again, looking to extend that season and get away from those really busy summer months, looking at that responsible tourism again. And the technology there is the Shetland Orca Spotting Facebook page, which has really opened up sightings and being able to get a glimpse of these amazing creatures on a year-round basis. So that little bit of kind of social media technology has been really helpful, especially where we can't market something that's as unpredictable as orca sightings. And then with aurora, those figures that you see there are from our Shetland webcam network, which is a pretty amazing thing, really. And it goes around the world. It really opens up Shetland to all sorts of different countries. We have some great data coming back from it. And the point here is that it runs along. We have a fantastic camera in Unst, actually. Again, it's all in Unst, facing north, right at the very north. And it's a pretty accurate aurora cam. You can see what's coming in from the north. And it shows there that there's a spike. Once the aurora is there, the camera runs along at about 5,000 views a day, and then all of a sudden jumps to over 63 or 62,000. So that's the kind of power of these things, and that's where technology is starting to, technology can maybe help us along where we can't go along with the traditional kind of marketing that we'd like to do maybe, but we can't. So anyway, I'll end on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve, and thanks for sharing the images. I'm glad the sharing button worked. What I'm going to do now, we still have Laurie is going to talk to us, and anyone who's looking at the agenda might, if you're sort of OCD or something, you're probably thinking, oh no, we're the timing's all to pot. What we're going to do, since we have flexibility in this workshop, what I'd like to do is first of all listen to Laurie, and then I think we'll put off our discussions about what the negative and the positive outcomes are until this afternoon. Then we can roll that in with our recommendations. But since we'll have about half an hour to go before we break for lunch, we could take the opportunity to ask ourselves questions about the presentations that we've heard, to get more details and more feedback, so that we don't lose the opportunity of talking together about the wonderful material that we've heard. So that's what we're going to do. So first of all then, before people ask Steve about tourism in Shetland, I'd love to pass over to Laurie, and in Prince Edward Island. And Laurie's a long-term colleague of mine. We've worked together on lots of different island studies things, and I'm very pleased that she's with us this morning. Well, is it this morning? Yes, just this morning.
Just this morning. Yes, I think Stacey and I we get the prize for being up really, really, really early. So I'm really happy to be here, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me, and what a wonderful group of speakers you pulled together here. And so much of what I was going to say has been touched upon in detail, and I think I'll end up probably speaking more on the more of an overview. I am with the Institute of Island Studies at the University of Prince Edward Island in Charlottetown, PEI, which is on the east coast of Canada. And we also have a Master of Arts in Island Studies program similar to the MLIT in Island Studies that Andrew runs from UHI. So we have a lot of back and forth. One of the things that we've been doing in island studies since I joined, and that was 1990 is when I first started, the Institute started in 1985, is looking at different ways that islands can share lessons across the world. And we, instead of, always comparing to mainlands and what we're doing, we're actually looking at what other islands are doing. And so when Marcus was talking about population, already I know that Mike Andrews from the government of Scotland has been in touch with here in Prince Edward Island people talking about population strategies. So there's all of these wonderful little, trading of lessons and best practices and things that don't work that are going on. And so this is just one little way of tapping into some of those networks that are already being established. And so in island studies, we learned that, there's been a long history of inappropriate development on islands, mostly stemming from colonialism and the fact that islands look like property. So, hey, there's a little spot right there. I think we can exploit it, use it for its guano if you're Nauru, or plantation in the Caribbean, those pillaging of those resources like the minerals, fish in Newfoundland especially, trees in Tasmania, land, industrial agriculture, coal in Cape Breton, the monoculture single industry places that have sprung up all around the world on islands. And so what does that do to a place when it becomes so dependent on one thing? And so I always love to do an assignment with my students every fall when I teach the intro to island studies, is to talk about is small really beautiful or possible? Thinking about small islands, is small beautiful or possible? And inevitably somebody, a few of them will come back to George Schumacher, can't remember his last name, Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, from 1973, and how we use the assets of small islands to do economies as if people mattered, which is the subtitle of the book, Small is Beautiful. So that's what I want to talk about, is those the human scale and place-based development, or asset-based community development, sometimes what we call ABC development, where we respect the land that we live on, we respect the ocean that surrounds us, and make those developments that are place appropriate, and that they work, they engage with the history, with the culture, with the identity in often First Nations, Inuit and Innu populations in places, especially in Canada. So you're really using your people, and you're using your place to create industry, create development that is going to, where a community is involved, where stakeholders are involved. And if you can have that kind of involvement, then you'll succeed, most likely, because you have everybody behind you. Islands are really well known for being creative and ingenious. We have to, out of necessity, often we're cut off. And so how are we going to fix it? We can't just run to Canadian Tire, the hardware store, to get something. We'll have to make it. So a lot of places have shown that they can really do well in the marketplace because of the creativity that comes out of these different places. Of course, on an island, we are, as somebody had mentioned, very vulnerable to external shocks. But we also have learned resilience, again, that word that's getting overused a lot, but we're able to turn on a dime when needed. And you end up, using your strong cultural identity and the rich stories of place to create meaningful development. Being careful, tourism is often seen as a silver bullet, and I just loved hearing about the sustainable tourism initiatives that are going on islands, and Shetland is no different. I also have come across what I've called the power of one on an island, and it seems almost like I'm a bit fuzzy on the spaceport. It sounded like Debbie and her husband owned the land, and so they probably had a lot of money, and they were able to attract investors to create the spaceport and make it a private thing. And it's very similar, I think, to Zita Cobb on Fogo Island in Newfoundland, where she was a multimillionaire coming back and investing in her island and making jobs, and she created a social enterprise out of which is thriving there. And I've seen this in Tasmania, where you have people coming in and doing things that are really good, but it's just one person. We have one here in Prince Edward Island, Regis Duffy, who's done a similar kind of thing. But it ends up, you end up punching above your weight in many instances. These companies that have been created around the world, as long as they've been have access to amazing people, your assets are always going to be your people. Instead of economy of scale, Godfrey Baldacchino calls it economies of scope, and being able to use your ability to create things that are meaningful development that feedback into the community. Of course, you have to have a good idea, you have to have your personnel, you have to have infrastructure, which in this day and age is internet, which we've seen off and on this morning already. Often on an island, you can have a lower cost of rent, although Prince Edward Island has just shot the opposite direction in the last 5 years. And so it's really expensive to live here now and to do business here. Also transportation issues. And Andrew and I are working on a book about the effects of bridges and other communication links, not just physical ones, and how that feeds into a place's ability to succeed in the global marketplace. I also, before I talk just couple minutes about what PEI is kind of famous for. Just carrying capacity. I think that when thinking about tourism on that tiny island of Unston, I was there last summer and we didn't get to go because the ferry was broken. We were going to have a tour of the spaceport or see what was going on there, and we weren't able to go. And so there's an example of what could happen, right? On any given day, you've got to, you have to be, and Andrew turned on a dime when we had a beautiful day tour of the rest of Shetland, but you have to be able to roll with the punches on islands, and we're pretty good at that often as well. Yeah, but the carrying capacity of a place is the tourism that they're going to, if they're going to be attracting all these people, is the little tiny island and the infrastructure to get there going to be able to keep it, make it successful without irritating. You've probably heard that, irritating the locals, you know, the iridex, or the irritation index that happens when you piss off your neighbors. So here on Prince Edward Island, you've probably heard about blue mussels. This is something that we do really well, the aquaculture, the blue mussels that found all over the world. Our Malpeque oysters go out, our lobster, and of course our potatoes. We're famous for our potatoes, but then that is industrial agriculture. And here on Prince Edward Island, I would love to see more of a return to small-scale sustainable agriculture that Stacey was talking about in the Caribbean and or in Barbados anyway. And you know, what is it, organic farming, instead of polluting the oceans and the rivers because of nitrogen runoff, etc. Our biggest export has been cultural, actually. Anne of Green Gables. She was a creation of a local writer, and Lucy Maud Montgomery. And so we have a really wonderful long tradition of using our creativity and culture to sell our island and to celebrate our island and to tell our stories. So I loved hearing and seeing Anne's art, because I too am a practitioner, a poet, and am very heavily involved in the arts community. So as a way of communicating our message, using the language of art to get at what is important, I think is one of my passions as well. And I'll just finish up by saying, you know, something that we've been doing here at PEI is looking at well-being. And Andrew and I are supervising a student from Scotland who's going to be doing a happiness index of islands and using the happiness index to find out which islands are happy. And that's all about well-being. And it's all of these things will feed into it. You know, if you have a really good way of making a living, that seems to be at the heart of people's happiness. And there's so many great ways of doing it instead of inappropriate ways of doing it. And then immigration and retention, that's another thing that we're doing here at the Institute, looking at how we have to bring in people, because our people are getting old and are dying, but we have to, and we're not replenishing. So immigration is really important, and yet keeping them here, again, with those good jobs and the housing and the healthcare and the huge ecosystem that is an island. So I'll stop there and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, how all of these ideas are going to come together. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Laurie, and thanks for that international perspective and the island studies perspective as well, looking at you know, the situation worldwide. And it's one of the things that comes out of what you're saying, which I think is very important, that well, place appropriate development and non-colonial you know, or overcoming that colonial past. And I sometimes wonder whether the Scottish Islands should take a leaf out of the book of say the Caribbean islands that did suffer terribly from colonialism. There's a sort of element of colonialism in the history of the Scottish Islands as well. And there's, you know, there's a discussion to be had about whether the Scottish Islanders should consider themselves to be indigenous and you know, pursue the same sort of indigenous rights that communities in, say, in Canada or Australia are trying to do at the moment, to be given some sort of special right to the land that they've lived on and farmed, and the seas that they fished for generations. So lots of interesting things there to think about. Right, so we don't have a huge amount of time. We don't have time to sort of engage with the breakout sessions yet, so we'll put that to one side and we'll do that this afternoon, those who can attend this afternoon, and rather we'll take the opportunity to question each other about the presentations that we've heard, and everyone's coming at this from different perspectives. There's people with an international perspective, those who are based on some of the smaller Scottish islands. There's those of us who are, not us, but there are those of you who are working in development, who are looking for sort of sustainable opportunities in future. There are those who are working in tourism, creative practice, and even space. Who we haven't heard from, unfortunately, yet are those who are involved in the traditional industries in the Isles, and fishing, farming, crofting, and it's a great shame that we don't have people to talk to that at the moment, considering the pressures that these activities are under at the moment. But nonetheless, let's ask each other some questions. So you can either put the questions or thoughts in chat, or stick your hand up and direct your question to someone. But I see we'll start with Alistair's pre-lunch mind dump in the chat, which is an excellent place to start. Alistair, since you put that there, would you like to sort of kick us off with what you're thinking about with these things?
Oh goodness, what did I write down? It's really just, yeah, I suppose I put that in there sort of as a sort of contribution whilst I'm unable to attend, unfortunately, in the afternoon. So it's not very, it's not ranked. It's really just a sort of, I suppose, trying to think ahead of some of the sort of key issues that I've probably seen in my professional career, but also perhaps with my time in the development trust as well, and looking at the sort of crossover between some of the challenges regarding the sort of community and the economic backgrounds to rural areas. And speaking as somebody who went away from Orkney when I was 18, I was quite happy to go because I thought it was boring and I wanted to go somewhere exciting. So I went, well, unfortunately, I only got as far as Aberdeen and became a student there for several years and came back to Orkney. I think the point I made about developing educational opportunities, I know plenty of people who left Orkney to study, but they didn't really want to leave. They would have preferred to stay home. So the development and hooking people in at a younger age than giving them the opportunity to stay here, because like I say, not everybody that leaves comes back to the islands, and that sort of that brain drain is something that we've all witnessed and seen, and it's very hard to undo that. But giving people more opportunities to not leave the island, the industries, and especially in Orkney around energy and around other areas are developing as they are. There's many opportunities now for recruitment, so getting a job is not as challenging as it may have been when I was younger, but keeping people here to continue that sort of positive demographic is always going to be a challenge, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see Luke, I think you put your hand up, Luke.
Yeah, just to build on what Alistair said, I think that's dead right on the retaining the young people who want to stay. We need to, for our demographic, we need to retain as many young people as we can. We're drawing in a lot of people to do masters at the UHI, but also at Heriot Watt as well. But one of the key challenges we're coming up against is schools are encouraging young people to leave. They're not encouraging them to take on opportunities that are here. They're saying, you have to go away to get life elsewhere, so then if you want to come back, feel free. But they're very much trying to push them off island. That is almost, if you have the capacity to go to university, go to university. And while we don't want to stop people from doing anything like that, I think there has got to be a much more emphasis put on the opportunities that are on island as well, rather than just the default that you will leave unless you can't go to university or can't afford it, and then you can stay and we'll see what we can do with you then. There's got to be more of a default of, well, actually, for the community's benefit and for your benefit also, it might be the best thing for you to do is stay, even if you could go to Oxford or whatever. There are opportunities here. Electrical engineers are going to also be able to charge what they want if offshore wind comes here, because we're going to need so many of them. So, and people are now studying, a lot of electricians, because of the starting salary is brilliant. We need people to do a lot of these jobs, and there's a lot of folk that want to do them, and it's increasing those training opportunities. So that's dead right.
And if I may just jump in and add there, so some emerging studies are looking at how age is a definitive factor on your experience of life on islands as well. I think there's this bit of a mismatch between those who are making governance decisions around education versus care homes, you know, and speaking in the community as well, just on the topic of climate change, a lot of young people felt the sense of oppression, that they weren't able to vocalise kind of what their issues and their ideals were, and they weren't really supported by the kind of older generations who tend to be making the decisions. So there's a bit of a mismatch, and certainly in the big three that sort of emerges as a bit of a theme, which, you know, getting that youth voice heard because it's out there, but then how that becomes impactful in the decision making process is a bit missing, I think.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it is difficult, isn't it? And we've got Marcus, you put your hand up first, I think.
Educational opportunities. There has been bits of work done on this by Rosie Alexander that looked at young folk leaving Orkney and Shetland. I was interested to see what your thoughts are, Alistair, and who that would play with the local and virtual education, how it would be developed or how it would be promoted in Orkney and Shetland or any of the isles.
Yeah, certainly. I think, and when I'm saying education, I'm not necessarily always thinking of academic education. That there's other training opportunities. I think what Luke said as well, just go back to that point, is, you know, of a generation where I think it was decided by government basically that the people in Scotland needed to be better educated. So Stirling University, Heriot-Watt University, UHI, eventually all these universities were created. So, you know, it was very much a push on educating the next generation, possibly to the detriment of more vocational skills and the gap that we see now in society. So it's not necessarily just about academic. I suppose it's more about the vocational opportunities that virtual learning has as well. I mean, Marcus, as you'll be fully aware, in Orkney, we have quite a strong academic base. We have UHI, we've got Heriot-Watt, we now have RGU working as well. There's connections with other universities. So I think there's definitely an opportunity that you could have a university like RGU Orkney, who has, you know, a very small base here, but they're starting to push out more virtual courses, more virtual opportunities. So I guess ultimately the universities need to see the value in the investment as well, because at the end of the day, universities are trying to make money to cover costs, to cover salary costs. So they need to know that if they're going to invest, it's got to be in something worthwhile, which is obviously how Heriot-Watt sort of, I suppose, effectively developed their model around the postgraduate courses focusing on energy, renewable energy, marine spatial planning, etc. So whilst they've not cornered the market, there's obviously other potential opportunities there. If we look at the opportunities around energy being one of the main factors, but obviously there's other sectors around sort of tourism, agriculture, around technology, you know, so there's definitely opportunities that universities are probably looking at to develop more sort of virtual learning. But a lot of that as well seems to be around universities maybe actually having some sort of base or outpost in the islands as well now. So it's definitely changing the whole educational landscape.
Can I just come in here, because I probably need to put my Orkney College, as in the college in Kirkwall here, hat on, because it started off very much as an FE, further education college.
You just conked out.
Is that us? Right, that's the full room then, is it? Can you hear me?
Hear you now, yeah.
Yeah. No, and basically kind of, you know, you could study cookery, agriculture, construction, you know, all these like very kind of practical and hard courses at all levels. But I think, you know, one of the words that came out this morning, particularly with the space and that, was that word exciting. And I think, like you're saying, Luke, I think that younger adults are encouraged to leave the island because it's more exciting, in inverted commas. And I think having spent most of my adult life south, and coming back, I find it quite exciting to be back in Orkney, but as an older adult. And I think, you know, what we're talking about is about creating a kind of vibrant, exciting community for people to stay in and to return to. And I definitely feel there's a kind of, certainly people I work with south are really find coming to Orkney very exciting. I think, well, hang on, you know, it's a sort of flipping really where we think the centre of excitement might be too. So that sort of talk about space travel, which of course does just kind of take you out into, you know, outer space and other realms in your imagination. I think it's how do we generate that here, and I think renewables have been doing that for a while too. You know, the whole kind of all the cliches, which I don't necessarily believe in, but you know, but the storybooks of pioneers or whatever of kind of really going out there and being experimental, and the cliche now of the Orkney Lab, which I think has now been more coined as the lighthouse, isn't it, by Mark Hull and others, is a really nice metaphor too. I think the islands become lighthouses to bring people, well, not to bring people into it, to kind of alert to things that are happening here. Anyway, sorry,
very good point.
That's just a comment.
No, very good comment, and you know, the excitement element. You're absolutely right. When we put on conferences either in Orkney or in Shetland, we have no difficulty attracting people to come, because it seems like an exciting destination to visit. And well, if you want to understand the Vikings, then you come to the Viking heartland, don't you? And if you want to understand the cutting edge of renewable power, you come to Orkney as well. So people are becoming more and more aware of this unique selling point that we have, that we shouldn't forget about. We are exciting destinations. Perhaps not so exciting if you grow up in a place, but you know, as you say, when you come back, things have changed, and you realise the merits of the place that you left. And anyway, it's not a bad idea to go away and learn new things and then come back with your skills. And I think the next hand up was Laurie.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. I've had this happen so often. Students come and they are into my class and they say, oh, I could, you know, as a teenager, I could hardly wait to leave. And so you go away and you realize what you have, this treasure to come back to. And they're just so glad to be back, and then being part of island studies in academia to learn that other people feel the same way. So I think this is a phenomenon that we should be studying more carefully and with more rigor, because it's quite extraordinary around the world. Two other points. I think it was Stacey who mentioned the what was it? Focus on renewable technology that balances the deindustrialization, and climate change is such a huge issue. And I think if any futuristic stuff, we're going to have to really hone in on that, because islands are at the forefront of climate change, and you just, even if you don't have the effects of sea level rise, you're going to have those effects of the storms and storm surges and hurricanes and things. We had a horrible hurricane here in Prince Edward Island last September that's just changed everything here. And the last thing I would like to make sure we talk about this afternoon is the importance of governance and the leadership that will take us through. And we have, whether or not it's at the community level, the municipal level, in Prince Edward Island, we have the you know, we're a province, so we have our own premier, but also the Canadian government that we are under the umbrella of. So making sure that we have good governance that will take us through to, you know, utilize our best assets. And governance is often the thing that's overlooked most in development.
Yeah, very good point. That was one of the things that Luke pointed out in his negative futures, the fact the island's just being used by outside bodies and not having any agency themselves. So we'll definitely come back to that. And then Stacey, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, I just thought it was fascinating to hear that schools are actively encouraging students to leave, when it's ironic that in Barbados, so many people will want to go to Orkney because it's different, it's interesting. You know, there's the cultural aspect, there's the fact that there is that creativity, there is that different landscape, there is the potential for so much innovation there. So it's really surprising to hear that schools are encouraging young people or people to leave. So I guess it's that idea that familiarity breeds contempt. And it would be interesting actually to maybe do some kind of cultural exchange. But yeah, I'm really surprised to hear that. So I think yeah, people there should really focus on how fantastic and you know, to me even the wonder of the culture, the Viking culture. I did Nordic studies when I was a teenager, and people thought I was crazy. That was my first degree. I went to Denmark to do it, and I'm so glad I did that. And that idea of, you know, I would love to be able to study that where I'm from. So I think it's amazing that there are those opportunities there. I think people need to skew that view of it and encourage people to stay, and let's think of ways that we can have young people appreciate what they've got.
I think there's maybe change there now a bit, but I suppose I'm referring predominantly to my own experience, but as well as that there is, you know, to sort of defend to the schools, there is always pressure on the schools to try and attain high academic standards and achievements, and a lot of that has historically focused on getting students to higher education, and predominantly that has focused on them leaving the island. So whilst it's maybe not been a primary objective to almost force people off Orkney, it's been a primary objective to try and reach the highest academic standards for the population, and in a lot of cases that has led to them sort of taking that stage out to the next development off island. So you know, the more evolution of modern apprenticeships, and just sort of, I think the way that they are now seen as not a second option in your life. If you're not clever enough to go to university, you do a trade. That should be, in a lot of people's that should be their first choice, because it's maybe what they're more suited to and what they want to do. And certainly from a salary perspective, as you know, once you get through your apprenticeship, probably a very competitive salary compared to a lot of academic posts. So it's just changing that, I guess, that mindset. But once again, coming back to a lot of that will come from national policy as well.
Yeah, and I think there's the feedback mechanism now to challenge some. So I think that's, you know, the dark side of indicators and benchmarks, kind of that maybe go awry in islands. But you know, we talk about economy, we talk about you know, the job prospects and salaries and things like that. So we have a very uneven salary distribution in Orkney, depending on age or gender, particularly location as well. But it's also this lifestyle, isn't it? Like often you go away to experience something new. So we're talking about folks coming here, but you know, is it a rite of passage, and can we maybe normalise this sort of transient part? You know, maybe if young folks are moving out, but maybe we have a different proponent of folks moving in, and it sort of churns over time, and whether that can become, you know, normalised.
It's a pity we don't have a friend of mine, who's the headmaster of Sunday School. He was hoping to pop in today. Stuart McPhail, who went to school with me in Stirling, but unfortunately I don't think he's going to be able to make it, because it would be interesting to hear what he has to say and what priorities he's progressing in his school. But okay, that's something else to take up this afternoon when we're exploring the low aspiration and high aspiration futures and edging towards recommendations, which is really what we want to do at the end of the day. I think there's time for another couple of questions or discussion points, and perhaps we could think about tourism now, because I see, Stacey, you also put a question in the chat about tourism. I'm never quite sure where to categorise tourism. Is it a traditional industry? Is it a modern industry? Is it an extractive industry? What is it? Anyway, it has all elements of all these different things. But you ask whether how do we go beyond sustainable and responsible tourism to embrace the concept of regenerative tourism, which Steve mentioned before. So I don't know, Steve, if you're still there, have you got a comment about that?
Yeah, regenerative tourism. Just making sure that I'm getting the right end of the stick here. When we were talking about people coming up to work in maybe we were talking about rewilding. Here we've got we have quite a big peat restoration project that we're undergoing and talking about expanding on. And I was talking about this the other day, that that kind of project. I don't know if that was what Stacey was referring to, this kind of project where we have people with a lot of interest in coming up and getting involved in that type of project. I think maybe especially younger people as well. That's really putting a lot back. I mean, so young people are coming here or will come here, hopefully, and really get that experience of working within the community and really putting something back into the community and into the place itself. So I suppose those kind of projects are growing, and I think the desire for those type of projects is growing. A lot of it does depend on agencies that are around at the moment, and how those projects get funded, and so you need a kind of catalyst. You need something to start them off. But yeah, I certainly think there is in Shetland there's a growing desire for those, and with climate change and the fact that we know that peatland is a carbon sink, and we don't want it to become a carbon source. And I think that will be driven more with these kind of imperatives as time goes on. One thing I was going to mention there, I was just interested in that. I don't really recognise that schools are asking students or encouraging them to leave particularly. I wonder if there's maybe a discrepancy between Orkney and Shetland here. And I was thinking with some of the other things that, it's very much the case that you can't throw all the island groups under one blanket, that we have these different kind of our own experiences. And I wonder if, because of what's happened to Shetland since the mid-70s, when we had oil and gas arrive here, and I don't know whether maybe we've been more exposed to these kind of apprenticeship schemes and these type of things, and more than maybe some of the other island groups. But certainly, I think we need to remember that islanders have travelled the world, for many years, and it's been I'm not sure if there's more leaving now than there used to be, but certainly, you can hear my accent. You can hear my London accent. That's because my aunt's dad left home because there was absolutely no work. This was pre-70s. He left because there was absolutely nothing in Shetland at that time. The community was very, very poor. Probably 90% of the community very, very poor, and you had to leave because there was no work. So I think we always need to remember that as long as we have these innovations coming along, and Debbie's spaceport was a great example of that. That not necessarily something you would associate with Shetland, but there's been some, forgive the pun, kind of blue sky thinking around that. And I think you need that. You need it to be organic. You need to have these jobs on offer to keep the kids here. My son is away at uni at the moment. I'd love to think he'll come back, but it probably won't be for a while. But I was thinking that, again, it's maybe we're missing out on, and it's that difference between actually just providing the jobs, or do you actually actively incentivize? One of the things that came to mind was that recent Scottish Government initiative where they were talking about giving £50,000 to people to move to the island. And I kind of had it in mind then. That was just before he was about to go to uni. And I was thinking, well, why don't they offer the kids £10,000 a year for 5 years to study on condition they come back? or something along those lines, rather than take a punt on somebody coming up to Shetland who's never been here and will probably, we always say if you last the first winter, then that's the kind of test. But you're really, it's a shot in the dark, things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of interesting points been raised here, and yeah, I was interested in Stacey as well going to Denmark for those studies. I mean, she probably noticed that there were big differences between Denmark and Norway and Sweden then, and how we're in Shetland, we kind of people who hark back to those kind of times, we think of ourselves as Norway's Western Isles, but now we're Scotland's Northern Isles. But once upon a time we were very geographically, I suppose, at least labelled something very different. But anyway, really interesting discussion. So I don't know if that's wandered way off the point of regenerative, but yeah, I think regenerative, yeah, definitely the way forward.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. But no, interesting points as well. I mean, the connection with the historical connections between the Northern Isles and Scandinavia are important, and they're still important today. I mean, there are people looking to examples in Scandinavia, things that can be put to work here, and vice versa. So it is important, and the point about all the islands being different and the island groups being different because of their historical experience is very important as well, and certainly not something we want to lose in our discussion. And you may have noticed there's a big gap in the group of people who've turned up to talk this morning. Nobody from the Western Isles. And that's not because I didn't invite some people, but so the experience of the Western Isles, of course, is very different from that in our islands, both in Orkney and Shetland. But hopefully some Western Islands representatives will turn up this afternoon. And as I say, the other thing that I was hoping that this is incredibly important, is the traditional industries as well. What role what future do they have in the islands? If we're talking about place-based appropriate development, there's only so much the space industry can do for us. What about the fishing industry, which is up in arms at the moment over these plans that are coming from the Scottish Government, which takes us into the governance question. And the role of farming in Orkney and crofting in Orkney and Shetland, in Shetland and the Hebrides. I would love somebody to have been able to speak about that, how they see that in there by 2050. Will crofting still have a role? But I think what we'll do now then, unless anybody's got a comment on that those specific points that I just made.
I've got one quick one, if possible, Andrew.
Yeah.
It was primarily in and around the regenerative tourism, and there was a question I had for Stacey and Laurie in that. One of the key things that we are seeing is things like volunteerism. You've also got things like digital nomads and various things coming in as well. And the opportunities we're saying, sending kids away isn't the end of the world. Some of them want to come back, but we've done very well at attracting younger people and younger households here. Sometimes it's for a short term, but then they get here and they decide they want to stay. So volunteerism might be a key way of doing that, and digital nomads is also another really interesting way of doing that. So it was just to see if there was anything happening in Prince Edward Island and also in Barbados around that sort of area. And then just a follow-up question for Laurie on agriculture. You mentioned obviously some large industry there selling off with large. You'd quite like to go back to that smaller. Is there a cooperative approach where there's almost lots of smaller farmers coming together to not compete with, but be able to sell at that larger scale? It's like that's the only way it's going to work. Everything else is getting bigger, and individual small farms can't compete with that larger. But we've got a couple of really good cooperatives here. Papa Wester's got one, and others that are trying to pull things together. So just wondering if that was something that was being done and being looked at as well.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say yes, farmers market cooperatives and people that are, there's a really strong organic farm network as well. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the only way that it's going to work.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, and in terms of digital nomads, as it were, I remember it was actually first in response to the pandemic when Barbados realized that we could not rely on the traditional paradigm of tourism. We started the welcome stamp. It was one of the first kind of specific visa programs, as opposed to the citizen by investment scheme that, you know, is not talked about and is quite controversial. But the welcome stamp was just a way to get, you know, people to come rather than you're a tourist, you're here, you can stay and you can work remotely. And it was specifically to encourage people to come to work remotely and then become a more integrated part of the community of Barbados. So yeah, I think that's an important point.
Thank you very much. And one of the great things that both Visit Orkney and Visit Shetland are doing is to provide information for people to come and live in the islands as well, which Steve, you know more about than I do.
Yes, well, that's Promote Shetland, which is the DMO. That's not actually Visit Scotland. We're the tourism element, but Promote Shetland are live, work, study, invest, and visit. So we work very closely with them on that visit strand, and also somewhat on the invest strand as well. But they are they're a different kind of DMO, and we obviously know that's in this case it's a destination marketing organisation. They're different to a lot of others in that they are fully funded by the council here. So it's in a lot of cases DMOs are membership organisations, but the council has obviously recognised that there is a need to invest in all of those strands. And live, work, study, invest. It's very important to try to just the same. I mean, that's maybe where you can throw a blanket over it. Is that the population? It's an aging population. It's the workforce, especially that workforce age is getting older and older, and we do need those young people to come back. But we also need to attract investment as well, and that's where people like Debbie and one of the points I think Laurie was making was that that Debbie and Frank they're actually not very rich. They're not these massively rich investors. They're entrepreneurs basically, and they don't own the land. They own the ex-RAF base in Unst. And they bought that and they turned that into a kind of holiday accommodation with hostels and self-catering houses, which was great because it was a big sprawling kind of concrete complex that could have become a real eyesore. But they regenerated that, and then afterwards this idea of the space came along after I suppose after they'd looked at some of those reports. But actually they work with the landowner on Lamberness, so that doesn't belong to them, and they brought in some big investment from all around the world. I know Lockheed Martin are involved and all sorts of different companies. So they're not. It's not like a return to the Lairds. It's not. They're not that type of organisation. So yeah, it's. There was something else I was just thinking about. Something you said as well. Oh, I know. Were you talking about your aquaculture? So aquaculture massively important in Shetland, and you mentioned mussels in particular. And I would say 80% of either Scotland or the UK mussels come from Shetland. So very important to us as well. And we have those kind of industries. As I say, maybe it's more prevalent in Shetland than in other island groups that we have massive fishing, aquaculture, and we've obviously had oil and gas. And still have oil and gas to a certain extent, although that's obviously going to be diminishing over the next few years. But we are about to become the UK's biggest onshore wind farm as well. So again, we have that, you know, you've got that kind of, I suppose it's a bit of a juxtaposition where we've got industries like space, but then we've also got industries like the renewables and the wind farm. And how do we make that work with the tourism product as well? How do we make that become part of the tourism product? So, so by the end of this year, we will have 103 very large turbines, wind turbines, going up through the middle of the islands. So again, we're looking at how we balance this. How does it work in terms of the tourism, where tourism is looked at for the unspoilt beauty of the islands, but it's making that renewable energy argument and making it an attraction in its own right. So again, you know, nothing's ever plain sailing.
Absolutely, and when the wind blows strongly from the north, Shetland will crash into Orkney because well. So I think everyone, that's been really fruitful and really enjoyable. Lots of interesting ideas, and thank you everyone for your talks. I think it gives us lots to contemplate and to talk about this afternoon. I know some of you are not going to be able to make it this afternoon, so particular thanks for turning up this morning. Those who are going to turn up this afternoon, I think the way it's been organised this time is that it will be the same type of webinars, so it'll be a meeting. So I think yourselves and others will join and be sort of not just joining in the chat. So we'll start off in the afternoon considering these negative possibilities following current trends, and then move on, I say, to the positive ones and the discussion about recommendations that we can bring forward, and we already have some of those in the bag, so we can talk about those in more detail. So thank you very much, everyone, and it's been great meeting new people as well. So hopefully we can continue this conversation, networking, and discussion in future. It's great to have connections outside of academia into industry and into planning and development and tourism. So I think this is definitely the way to go. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see those who are coming back on the next webinar at 22:02. Okay, see you then.
Very much.
There we go.